It's the Fitness Lab Pittsburgh podcast, a new episode every week. A podcast about movement, part of making your life complete. Fitness Lab Pittsburgh, aka FitLabPGH, brings you interviews with people in the Pittsburgh area who understand movement is part of what makes life complete. Looking for a new movement idea or just want to hear interesting stories about people who make movement a priority? This is the podcast for you. Whether you consider the gym, dojo, or fitness studio your third place, or just want to learn more about movement, activity, and fitness to enhance your life, give FitLabPGH a listen. We interview locals in the Pittsburgh area who make Pittsburgh a great place to move. Subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Google Play, or check out our website for other subscription options. Subscribing is free and gives you notifications when we release new episodes. Each podcast episode will be long enough to pique your interest and short enough to hold your attention. Have an idea for an episode? Know somebody we should interview? Or just want to connect with us? Drop us an email, fitlabpgh@gmail.com, or follow us on Twitter or Instagram at fitlabpgh. Already a fan of FitLabPGH? Check out our sister podcast, Moving2Live. Moving2Live is a podcast for movement professionals and amateur aficionados. Moving2Live offers weekly interviews with movement professionals featuring topics from career development to coaching tips and education resources to advice for parents of student athletes. We look forward to hearing from you, and we hope you enjoy our next interview, starting now. FitLabPGH and our sister podcast, Moving2Live, firmly believe that movement should be treated as a lifestyle, not just an activity. That's why, in addition to our weekly podcast, FitLabPGH releases movement tip and lifestyle hack videos 3 times a week, and every Thursday we release a written FitLab Pittsburgh features. On occasion, we take a podcast that we've previously released and re-release it because we think the information is good or we want to help the guest promote something that they're doing. This week, we're re-releasing a podcast from December of 2018. We sat down with Doug Petrick, who's the head track and field and cross-country coach at Upper St. Clair High School, and we talked about his career as a coach, his career as a teacher, and the upcoming Upper St. Clair cross-country track and field coaches clinic that's happening this June 26th. You'll have an opportunity to register for this. If you're a runner, if you're a parent of a runner, if you're a coach, this is something you definitely want to check out. Again, thanks to Coach Petrick for taking time to talk to us. FitLabPGH back with another podcast episode. We are a podcast about movement and movement opportunities in the Pittsburgh area. Check out our sister podcast, Moving2Live, if you want to learn more about movement, because we believe movement is part of what makes your life complete. We should begin looking at movement as a lifestyle and not just an activity. As I've mentioned in previous podcasts, very often we find our guests either by stalking them on social media, and I say stalking in a good way, or we get recommendations from other people. And I think I came across today's guest from seeing him retweet an interview that we did for Moving2Live with Coach Daniel Caulfield, who's the head track and field and cross-country coach at California University of Pennsylvania. I reached out to him, asked him if he'd like to be on our FitLab Pittsburgh podcast. His response was, I'd like to, but I've got some responsibilities with my job as a coach. Can we do it afterwards? So we're here today with Doug Petrick. Doug is the cross-country coach at Upper St. Clair High School. He is a physics and math teacher also at Upper St. Clair, and he is also in the process of organizing a coaching clinic, if that's correct, coming up in almost 8 months. So he'll talk a little bit about that too. So, Doug, thanks for taking time on a Saturday afternoon to talk to FitLabPGH.
Well, thanks, Ben. I'm excited to kind of share a little bit about what we do.
And one of the things I always like to find out from people that we interview for FitLab Pittsburgh is, are you a Pittsburgh native? If so, why are you here? If you're not a Pittsburgh native, what brought you here?
Okay, so I'll try to keep it relatively short. I was born in Elizabeth Township. The address on my childhood home is McKeesport, even though it's actually Elizabeth Township. And I was born and raised in the Mon Valley. I went to high school at Elizabeth Ford High School. I went to Penn State University for my undergraduate career in architectural engineering. So the short version is after that, I moved to Atlanta. I worked for a construction company as an engineer. I was there for about a year. Being that my mom and my stepdad both taught at Cal U, teaching was kind of in my bloodlines. Something when it was maybe directed towards, I didn't want to do the family business. So I decided to do something different. And then after about a year in construction as an engineer, which was a great career, it just, I was not making an impact as quickly as I thought I could. And so I thought back to what I liked to do in college, as geeky as it sounds. I did like to kind of prep stuff and study and learn and evolve. So I was lucky enough. My mom and my stepdad let me move back into the house. So I quit my job in Atlanta, moved back into Elizabeth Township, and got my master's in teaching. Did my student teaching at Baldwin High School, physics and math. And after graduation, I was lucky enough to get a job teaching at Upper St. Clair High School. And I've been there 17 years. So I guess that's maybe the short version of being here, leaving for a little, and then coming back again.
And I know you are the cross-country coach. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But are you a runner yourself, and were you a runner growing up?
Yes, and yes. So I do run now. I try to run about 4 days a week. And then on the 5th day, bike or cross train. On the 6th day, I try to do a brisk walk. And then one day I do absolutely nothing at all, which is good. It's nice to have a break. And I don't want to say I'm busy because everybody's busy, but that seems to fit my lifestyle and my schedule. Growing up, I did a lot of different sports. I quit a lot of different sports or got cut from a lot of different sports teams. So, football, quit that. Wrestling, quit that. Baseball, I kind of liked, but I wasn't that good. Basketball, I was terrible, even though I liked it. And probably by the time I got to high school, I want to say I joined the track and field team. I can't remember why. I probably had a couple friends that did it. And, I love being a part of the team. I think as a high school student, kids are always trying to find a place where they fit in. So it felt comfortable. I was kind of in control of my own destiny. I didn't have to worry about striking out and being embarrassed. It was kind of competing against yourself. So even though I would say I had a relatively mediocre, career in running in high school, it was fun. So, I did not run in college. I went to Penn State. There's no way I would have been able to make it on the team, but I did stay active. I would run on the golf course. And then I got away from running, I'd say for about 2-3 years, when I was working for the construction company in Atlanta. And actually becoming an educator again is probably when I picked up running on my own.
I'm curious, what was it that made you realize when you were in high school that you were probably not going to be able to continue running on a team in college?
I would say the times. Like, I can't even remember what I ran in cross country and 5K in high school, which tells you that it probably wasn't that good. I would say that I probably didn't even break 20 minutes as a high school guy. And, I think I actually did call a college that was Division I to kind of like, ask them if I could fit in. And the gentleman on the phone was nice enough to, not embarrass me on the phone, but kind of he let me know, hey, here's what a male athlete runs and here's what a female athlete runs. And then I kind of drew my own conclusion that was not going to happen for me.
And I think that's one of the nice things about running. If you want to continue to run, the times pretty much self-select you. If you are a high school athlete and you think, I really want to go run at a major Division I college, and as you said, you're running a 20-minute 5K, whether you're male or female, there's no way of saying, well, I had a bad high school coach or I just had a bad day. It's like, you're, for the women, probably 4 to maybe 5 at the good schools minutes off the time. And for the men, maybe as much as 6 or 7, right? Yeah,
no doubt. And the other thing that's kind of neat too, this is just in hindsight, is I would say if I truly wanted to run in college, I probably could have found one program in the United States, D1, D2, or D3, that would have allowed me to actually put a singlet on and race for them. But getting an education was kind of like my number one priority, and the limitations at that point of my athletic performance wasn't going to happen at Penn State.
I'm always curious with people we talk to for FitLab Pittsburgh, because there are so many ways to move. What is the most interesting movement-related activity that you've done in the past for you?
I was a Boy Scout growing up, so we did a lot of canoeing, a lot of hiking. We'd do rappelling. As I've become a parent, I feel like I'm injury prone. So I don't want to say I avoid things that I may slip, fall, or get hurt, because typically I slip, fall, and get hurt just by walking through my house.
And any bucket list or movement activity that you're going to do? I know you have 3 young kids, so at some point they're going to get a little bit older. Anything you have on your list that you want to do when you get a little more time?
I would like to race something further than a 5K. 5K is the furthest distance I've run. I feel like with my lifestyle, married, 4 kids, my wife works, I work, and just a lot of different things going on. I'd like to race something longer than 5K, so maybe 10K, a half marathon. Marathon, I don't know. I just feel like with the time commitment to do it well, it wouldn't mesh well with somebody that, teaches, coaches, writes, does some things on the side. I don't think it would make sense, but I could be wrong.
I like what you just said. I don't know if I could do it well. And I think devoting enough time to do something is a realistic thing that probably is under-addressed by people. That your goal should be to finish something, to finish it with a smile on your face, and to finish without having a life-altering experience. And if you look at some of the people who come across the finish line of some of these events, maybe they should have waited a few years till they had a little more time, or some people just aren't made to go that sort of distance. I had a good friend when I worked in Lexington whose husband was an ex-college football player who was a physician, and he was about 260.
Oh, wow.
And he said, I'm just not made to run. When I run, everything hurts. But he was a avid biker who did centuries and things like that because he didn't have the extensive pounding on 260 pounds.
Yeah. And I would say too, the way I look at it is moving, exercise. For me, it's running. It's something that adds value to my life. It brings me joy. It's not a stressor. I wouldn't want to get into a situation where I feel like I have to run. I run because I can run and I like to run. And I do some of my best thinking when I run. I don't think I've ever come back from a run where I felt worse. I usually mentally feel better. I feel charged. And so, I want to make it a positive experience if I'm going to be active.
I think the interesting thing for both this podcast and for Moving to Live, I've interviewed quite a few endurance athletes, and some of them have been very competitive when they're younger, but inevitably everyone that I've interviewed who's above the age of about 35 or 40, the message that comes out, and you just given the message in a slightly different way, is the most important thing is to be able to run. There may be, I want to do this race or I want to beat this time, but all of them have said one way or the other, the most important thing to be able to do is to continue to do what I'm doing because I really enjoy it. And I think that's something that you get as you get older and you have more responsibilities going on in life. You realize there's probably 3 or 4 things in your life that are really valuable and bring joy. Your family, maybe it's pets, maybe it's that. And if you find an activity that you enjoy like that, the most important thing is to be able to continue to do that activity, even if maybe you're not running as far as you want to run or as fast as you want to run.
That makes so much sense. I'd say, I'm in my 40s now, and maybe a decade ago, I wouldn't have enough common sense to not go for a run if I feel like trash, or, if I've been up all night with a sick child or working on something for school, not going for a run makes way more sense than making sure I get out the door.
I'm curious, is your wife a runner also, or is she active also?
She's not. She's active. She likes to do fitness classes, walk, elliptical trainer, but she would classify herself not as a runner.
What about the kids? Are any of them old enough to want to run with dad yet?
So I have 3. My oldest, Kai, is 10, and then Kenzie's the middle one is 7, and then Declan is the youngest. He is a little bit over 4. They're active. They bike, play soccer, softball. And sometimes when I leave the house, they say, hey, can I go for a run with you? And I typically say not yet when you get a little bit older. And not that I'm going to push them into running, but I think if I keep playing it that way, they'll end up doing it.
So a runner, a father, a teacher, how did you get into coaching cross country? Did you think 20 years ago when you finished your engineering education, working as an engineer, that someday you'd be a cross country coach?
Absolutely not. In my own mind, I would have thought that if you were going to coach anybody, you would have to be some world-renowned expert. You would have had all these personal accolades. You would have to be a mover and a shaker in running. And how I guess I could say stumbled upon it. I had a coworker who told me during winter months, so I think I was 2 years into teaching, hey, there's a position open as assistant coach on the track team. You know, you might want to look into doing it. Which I did. And I started out as an assistant coach with track, and I was an assistant coach for probably 2 or 3 years, and a great friend, Maureen Chermack, and a coworker who coaches cross country with me, the position had opened. We had a teacher that retired, and she suggested it. So no, I didn't think that I'd ever be teaching at Upper St. Clair, let alone teaching and coaching at Upper St. Clair. But it's fun. It's awesome.
And you do track coaching also, or just cross country?
I do track coaching as well. So indoor track will start pretty soon, and I'm the head coach. So it's myself and one assistant coach, Matt Cosgrove. And then in the spring, I'm the head coach of the track and field team, and it's myself and 7 other coaches. I have a couple of volunteers. So spring track's a little bit more chaotic, lots of different events. But no, I do it year round, and like I said, it's a very rewarding experience.
I'll put you on a spot, and you can plead off if you want to. Of those 3 seasons, the cross country, the indoor track and field, the track and field, which is the one that you enjoy the most?
Whichever one I'm in season. So I know I'm giving you a cop-out answer. So since we're in between seasons right now, but states for cross country just ended, I would probably say cross country. But I mean, each season, each sport, each season has its own pros and cons, and not in a negative way, don't want to do it way. It's just there's a different dynamic to track and field with all the different events than there is for cross country. Everybody trains for one event. And then indoor track is a little bit more chaotic. The meets that we go to, they're all like invites. So it's not for the faint of heart. You know, if you're okay being away for, 12 to 14 hours on a Saturday, then that's where you should be. But whichever season is usually my favorite.
Somebody offers you tickets to next year's NCAA Division I Track and Field Championships, but you can only see one event. What's it going to be?
I'm going with steeplechase. That's a no-brainer. People can fall. People can, lots of neat things can happen in the steeplechase. And I want to say in the United States, there has been an influx of very talented steeplechasers, but I'd love to see that.
I know I mentioned a couple of minutes ago my interview with Daniel Caulfield and Moving2Live. I don't know if this was in the podcast or not, but he was one of the people who talked about the importance of being able to move consistently rather than focus on times. And he was a former very, very high international level runner, ran in the world championships. And he described this situation when he was in Ireland, which is his native country, of seeing a 70-plus-year-old man who was trying to teach the steeplechase to people, essentially saying, well, screw it, let me show you how to do it. At 70 years old, going over the hurdle, very, very graceful. And Daniel described it as, when I saw that, I thought that was the neatest thing I'd ever seen.
Yeah, I listened to that episode, and it was cool to hear the passion in somebody trying to kind of pass it on or pay it forward to a younger group. And, I mean, if you coach, that's how you should feel about things.
I know I was a low-level basketball, baseball, and soccer player in high school. I hated the run. I was always excited if you could do something in basketball, like make a certain number of free throws to get out of running, and got into running in college just because it was something easy to do, and kind of dropped down the rabbit hole. Why do kids run? Because you can understand why they want to play football, because, it's Friday night. It's kind of cool to have the leather jacket. It's kind of cool to stand on the sidelines. But running is more intrinsically motivated because it's not a very good, if you're talking cross country, it's not a great spectator sport. Why do kids run?
Just looking at it maybe from Upper St. Clair point of view. So if we're just looking at cross country, Maureen, the other coach, and myself, we want to create a culture where kids want to be there. So it could be a social aspect. It could be they like to compete. It could be they ran the mountain gym class and, they want to see if they can get better. So the trick is to actually get them there. So we're trying to create like a positive culture, a winning culture, a culture where it's cool to run, where maybe it's just a hooded sweatshirt for somebody. That's a cool thing. And then once they get there, to keep them running is for them to see their performances improve and really be intrinsically motivated. I would say that as a coach, what works the best is move them towards independence. I mean, we want them to get better, but we want them to really want to get better because they want to compete. And we don't want them to be scared of competing. We want them to look at competing as kind of like celebrating their training. So I hope that does answer your question. It's kind of like trick them, get them on the team, and then once we've tricked them, hey, running's cool, which it is, then we can actually get them intrinsically motivated.
You described a couple of minutes ago that indoor track, typically the meets are invitational, so people who are going have to be fairly competitive. What's the transition from people who are students who run cross country to running track and field? Is it a pretty even transition? Do most people who run cross country also compete in track and field? I know some events in track and field, you're not going to take a shot putter probably and put them out on a cross country course, but there are a lot of running events. So do you find most of the cross country athletes also run track and field?
I would say so. I would think for most, looking at juniors and seniors in high school, if they want to be competitive as distance runners, if we have, we'll say 50 kids doing cross country in the fall, I'd say probably about 35 to 40 of those kids will continue doing some events in spring. And, we've had, just lately, like one of our most talented, runners that went to states for cross country is the guy. I mean, he's going to do the 8 and the 400 in the spring. So I'd say probably about 75% of the kids from cross end up doing spring.
I know if you read lay media now, there's all kinds of information that typically appears once or twice a week about athletes, specifically kids or adolescents specializing in one event, or the fact that youth sports are bad because they've turned into a money-making aspect. And I think what's interesting about track and field and cross country is the difference between somebody who's a freshman, just in how they're developed physiologically and psychologically, and a senior. Some of the seniors, depending on where they are, depending who they are, could literally be Olympians. Whereas somebody who's a freshman, who's 14, or maybe they're a young freshman, they're 13, how do you balance the training or designing training programs for somebody who's a young adolescent versus somebody who may be almost physically mature? Because it is a team. Do you have individualized workouts for each athlete or different groups of workouts depending on the athlete?
So it's kind of a complex answer. I'll go off one of the key words you mentioned is progression. So if we have a female athlete that comes in as a 9th grader for fall cross country, the deal is this: they're going to get better if we approach things intelligently over the season. They're going to get better throughout the year. They're going to get better throughout the career. So I guess the way that you have to look at it before we even talk training is, the die is not cast on day one as a 9th grader who's like 14 years old, that if they're running a 25-minute 5K, that's it. If they're the 5th person on the team, they're always going to be the 5th person on the team. So the way that we have to look at it is they're going to progress, they're going to get better if we approach things intelligently. The customization is, I guess, maybe the other part of the answer. And yeah, we do break up groups. Now with our team, we have guys and girls together. So we break it up based on ability level. And those ability level groups are constantly in flux. They're based on a couple different things when we customize training. If we have a kid coming off an injury or somebody who didn't run over the summer, we always do a weekly long run in the fall for cross, and we could have 2 runners, 2 girls that run 22 minutes for a 5K. But if one of them's a senior versus one is a 9th grader, their long run is going to look considerably different. But we customize things with minutes. A lot of the workouts that we do are based on feel. So toward the end of the season, we get into 5K specific workouts. But the way we try to customize it is really it's based on feel, and that's maybe a tricky thing for a high school kid to learn. But I'd say if they've been in the program for a season, they can figure it out. Usually about halfway through. I know it's kind of maybe not a straightforward answer, but it varies. It varies on how they're growing. It varies on their age. It varies on, do they do other sports? It varies on, do we see them over the summer? Are they coming off an injury? I mean, we don't want to wring a sponge completely dry, even if somebody's a stud coming in.
And how else do you have athletes measure their readiness or awareness? Do you do anything with heart rate? Do you do anything with monitoring how many hours a night they sleep, or mostly feel?
It's mostly feel, heart rate. Just that's something that we don't look at with our program. That would be great. The sleep is a prime consideration, but is probably most schools that have a similar demographic to us. These kids don't sleep. They're up all night doing homework. typical cross country kid. I mean, one of the kids we had at States, he does the fall play. He does musical, he chanticleers, he sings. I mean, these kids are involved in a lot of different things. So Marine and I might look at things maybe a little bit more conservative than somebody else. Doesn't mean that's right or wrong, but I hate to say less is more, but we'd rather err on the side of caution, have somebody maybe a little bit undertrained versus the kid who's your top few kids. They're not sleeping. They're doing lots of homework. They're very motivated. They're doing outside activities. We want to make sure when they come to practice, granted, things are going to be intense and hard, but we do not want to push them over the edge where they're going to get an injury.
And I know athletes can be competitive with one another. How do you deal with the athletes who, from your experience as a coach, it's like, okay, this is as much as they should do because they've got all these other outside responsibilities, and maybe this is a day it should be an easier workout, but they've got their, for lack of a better term, main competitor on the team who's maybe slightly better recovered because they don't do as many other activities. And the athlete who is doing more activities says to you, well, why is athlete B doing more than me? I need to do as much as them so I can keep up. How do you convince the athlete that less is more? Because many athletes have the concept that if a little bit is good, then a lot is better, and then the wheels fall off the train, and it's like, oops.
So we have a couple different ways maybe we try to consider that. One is every Wednesday we do a decompression run. So for all 3 seasons that I coach. So from cross, that Wednesday's a day we tell them the minutes. They have to do the minutes. It's like 30 to 60 depending on, who the kid is and what part of the season we're in. And that's the day that's the release valve where if, Bob and, Jake are, hard-nosed competitors head to head. We tell them go as slow as you want, talk to each other, have fun. And it's a loop. So it's nothing super challenging. So they need the release valve. The release valve, we do want them to be competitive. That's the day where you could have your best runner running with, I shouldn't say best, you have your most talented runner running with somebody that's maybe not there yet. And that's going to build a lot with the team philosophy and help the team grow. And then the other consideration is sometimes you have to shut it down with some of the kids in terms of what they're doing. And when we do our long run, Marina and I over the past 2 years, and they're in groups where they're assigned minutes. So like, top group might be 60 to 70 minutes. Second group, 50 to 60, 40 to 50. It actually comes down to trust. So they have to trust. And we do a lot of explaining the first 3 weeks about why, you're going to be in a certain group. And, we expect you, if you're running 30 minutes for your long run now, 12 weeks from now, the idea is probably you're up to like maybe 50 or 60 if things are fine. But it's trust, and you're not going to get 100% trust and buy-in from everybody. And that's okay. Maybe if they're a 9th grader, they don't 100% buy in. Maybe by the time the senior, they will buy in.
Have you ever had an experience where somebody who really didn't buy in as a 9th grader, by the time they were a senior, they were the person who was singing your praises and saying, listen to coach, he knows what he's talking about?
Those are the best parts of coaching. And really, when we're talking about a high school athlete, I can imagine how I would have responded to, training that looks different when I was a 9th grader, because a lot of what we do, it's not novel. There's other people doing it, but having a workout where we're telling the kids to run by feel and then kind of explaining what that should feel like, I don't think I would have been able to process that as a high school kid. So no, to get those stories of, we just had our cross country banquet about 2 weeks ago, and have some of those seniors up there, saying, hey, Coach Turmack and Coach Petrick, what you're doing makes sense, and we see it now. So yeah, to hear those stories, it's awesome to hear.
You've been at it long enough. Have you had any of your athletes who've gone on and now they're coaches?
Not yet. We've had a few of them, that we're in contact with, or ones that come back to practice and want to see how things are going, where they've expressed at some point they want to do that. And that's also super cool. And, I'm thinking one athlete in particular, I gave her the name of like 3 books and a couple podcasts she should listen to. And I told her, as with anything else, what we're doing now looks a little bit different than what we did a year ago, but what we're doing now looks very different than what we did 5 years ago. And I've told that individual specifically, don't think when you coach that you have to have everything that you want to do done the way that you want it year one. I mean, Maureen and I, who coach cross, we talk about that all the time. What little subtle shifts we want to make for next season before the season ends, so that we can just modify things, make it a little bit better for the whole program.
You've mentioned something a couple of times that I think is interesting that I hope I can get you to expand on a little bit more. Many coaches who coach, especially if it's recreational runners or if it's high school runners, they don't look at minutes of running. They look at distance. So there's like, okay, the event is a 5K. So if we're going to do a 5K in competition, then we need to do this much mileage. You didn't mention that. You haven't mentioned mileage. You've mentioned minutes. Why do you do minutes instead of mileage, which, by the way, I think is a great idea?
So really the reasoning behind it. So let's just think about it this way. If a kid comes in and at the beginning of the season, we're doing a 50-minute run, let's just say a junior boy, one would think that his fitness would improve by the 8th week. So if we do another 50-minute run, he's probably going to cover more mileage. So that's one reason. The other reason with the minutes versus miles, even though it's not as sexy to tell somebody how many minutes you ran, is what if that boy has 3 AP tests that week? What if that boy's parents are going through a bitter divorce? What if that boy broke up with his girlfriend? So when we do minutes, there's kind of another release valve. I mean, we still want them to get the training in, but I would say if I'm up all night as a junior, writing a report for AP English, I'm probably not going to be able to run that 50-minute run as well as I would have had I not, had that life consideration. And that's one reason. And that's something too that shifted probably within the last 3 to 4 years. And I might have heard it from my friend Jay Johnson. I'm sure I was influenced by somebody at some point, but we believe that what works for our high school athletes is minutes versus miles because of stressors outside of, the 2 hours you're at practice.
Does it have anything to do also with environmental conditions? One run may be hilly and another one may be flat, or today when we're doing this interview, it's very windy. So if you wanted to run at a set pace and you were running into the wind, it would be very difficult.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then even managing the team. So if we have everybody do a range of, 30 to 45 minutes, we know for a fact that the last person's done after 45 minutes. Whereas if we had all 50 kids do a 4 to 5 mile run, I mean, we might have some people rocking it and they're done super quick. And we might have some that, are running for over an hour. And if I'm looking at somebody that's new to running over an hour may not make that much sense. But if we say minutes, then we're putting a cap on it.
You also mentioned something that I think is interesting. You mentioned that some of your athletes may be doing multiple other extracurricular activities. And I know you can read on the internet, you can read everything on the internet, or you may see in articles kids specializing in an activity as young as 7 or 8 years old. Why the decision not to force your athletes to specialize and say, look, you can only do track or you can only do cross country and you can't do these other things?
Well, I would say if they make that decision on their own because they love running and, maybe if a kid's a junior or senior and they want to do, cross country and indoor track and spring track, that's fine. But, it's just maybe a philosophy point of view. I don't want to tell a kid that they should do the sport all 3 seasons. In fact, Coach Shermack and I told 2 athletes that, are involved in other activities that, hey, if you don't want to do indoor track this season, don't feel like you have to do it. I'm not going to feel a way about you. But it goes back to, we want these athletes to be intrinsically motivated. If it takes an adult in a supervising or authority figure position to force a kid to do something, I don't think maybe that's the best way. We want these kids to be independent and make decisions on their own in life. And, once again, if they're going to do all 3 seasons, awesome. But I would not want to put a restriction on an athlete to do that.
You also mentioned a few years ago that what you're doing with your training programs now is different from what it was a couple of years ago and significantly different from 5 years ago. And I think that builds into the opportunity to talk a little bit about what you have coming up in about 8 months with a conference. I know that there are some coaches who do the same thing every year. And this is, for example, in running, some of the old school coaches, like Mondays, it's this, Tuesdays, it's this, Wednesdays, it's this. And everybody does it that way. And you've mentioned before we started recording the number of people who have had an influence on you as mentors and how you've been to a coaching conferences and really gotten a lot out of it. So you've decided to develop a coaching conference. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So in June 26th of 2019, we're having a high school and college coaching conference. And I guess maybe the reason behind it, before we get into details, is, here in the South Hills, there's a lot of people doing really great stuff for the athletics and running community. And I just thought it would be a really cool thing to bring some people in from the outside. One is a college coach, Daniel Caulfield at California University of Pennsylvania, who has a wealth of knowledge. He's an amazing coach. He's also an amazing person. And the other individual that we're bringing in is Coach Doug Souls from Great Oaks, California, who's actually a friend that I met at a coaching clinic that I went to last year in Boulder, Colorado. And he's done a lot of amazing things on the national level in cross country and high school. So having kind of two different people, one that's a high school coach, one that's a college coach, the audience for this clinic would be, college and high school coaches. And it's really to demonstrate a couple things. One is there's many different paths to success. The other one is to have maybe, if a high school coach attends, maybe look outside of the South Hills, which I think is important. If somebody's aspiring to eventually have kids on the national level, Doug Souls is the high school go-to guy, arguably probably one of the best, if not the best, 1600 meter high school coach in the United States. And then if you're a high school coach or middle school coach or club coach and you want kids in college, I don't think there's a better coach than Daniel Caulfield at California University of Pennsylvania. He's an accomplished athlete. He's an amazing motivator. He's a fantastic coach that runs an awesome program. And he does a lot of things in a positive way that are good for the community. So, there's somebody that's going to be speaking that if you're a high school coach, hey, I want my kids to maybe have an opportunity to run in college. I'm sure Daniel would have some insight to, things that you might be able to modify or change to get you there.
I'm hearing you describe this, and I think you're maybe short selling this. There are a lot of coaches out there who coach recreational runners or masters runners. I know you've got the Pittsburgh Marathon. You just had the EQT 10 miler last weekend. Would this be open for them too to learn more? Maybe not from somebody who trains athletes specifically the distances they have, but as you've mentioned, sometimes you can take information from other sources or other sports and transition it in.
Yeah, no doubt. So maybe the audience should just be somebody that works with people that move and has an open mind. If you want to maybe think and discuss about what you're doing, then that would be the place for you. If you kind of want to not share anything and not hear new ideas, then maybe it doesn't make sense.
And I say that because I've had the opportunity to interview Coach Caulfield, and I've known him before I interviewed him. And even though I'm not a cross country or track coach, and I never did cross country or track in college or high school, whenever I talk to him, I drop down the rabbit hole and walk away going, that's an interesting way of looking at it, or that's something I hadn't thought at. So I would encourage you to consider not just high school and college coaches, but reach out to all the recreational coaches who are coaching runners of all age levels.
That makes a lot of sense, because I would say, intelligent principles for athletes, specifically runners, are going to be very similar across the board. Granted, the training might look a little bit different for a 5K runner or a marathon runner, but no, I think that makes a lot of sense.
We've had the good fortune to be talking to Doug Petrick. He is the cross country, indoor track, outdoor track coach and a mathematics and physics teacher at Upper St. Clair High School. Doug, I want to thank you for taking time to talk to FitLab Pittsburgh. Moving to Live is my other podcast. I did 4 interviews of that this week, so I'm a little confused. But I know some of the information that you have really transitions across to anybody who wants to move.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity, Ben.
Thanks for listening to the latest episode of FitLabPGH, brought to you by Moving to Live. Intro and exit music is Marathon Man by Jason Shaw. Check out the show notes for contact info for our latest guests, links to other information mentioned in the episode, and links to our sister podcast, Moving to Live. Moving to Live is a podcast about movement and exercise for professionals and amateur aficionados. Moving to Live offers topics from career development to coaching tips and education resources to advice for parents of student athletes. You can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Google Play, or check out our website for other subscription options. Your free subscription gets you notified when we release a new episode. Questions, comments, suggestions? Email us at fitlabpgh@gmail.com or follow us on Twitter and Instagram at fitlabpgh and like us on Facebook. If you enjoy our podcasts, please tell your friends about us and consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. Make FitLabPGH a go-to place to learn more about movement in the Pittsburgh area. Until next time, keep on moving.